So the next part of chapter 1 deals with different properties we can use on numbers and on variables. So in general, we are talking about algebraic properties. Okay? And basically what I want you to be keeping kind of in the back of your brain as you're thinking about this is, how do these algebraic properties work to simplify and solve equations? We're going to look at 7 of them, and I'll point out as we go some that are especially important or ones that we really kind of use a lot. So as we go, I'm going to give you the name of the property. Then I'm going to give you an example of it in action. Okay? So the first two kind of go together. They are the additive identity and the multiplicative identity. And basically this word identity is that when you do addition or multiplication with these numbers, it doesn't change. So the additive identity is 0, and the multiplicative identity is 1. Here's why. If I pick a number and I add 0 to it, I get the original number back. Same with a variable. If I have x plus 0, it's still x. Okay? With the multiplicative identity, if I multiply with 1, I get the same number back. One reason why this is kind of helpful for us in terms of solving equations is that if I'm solving something, x is the same as 1x. So just kind of have that in the back of your mind. But these two, they go together. Speaking of these properties that go together, we're going to also look at the additive inverse. And let me give myself a little more room. The multiplicative inverse. These are some crazy fancy names for opposite, in other words, plus and minus, or in the case of multiplication, the reciprocal. Here's how this works. The additive inverse would be like 5 and negative 5, or negative 3 and positive 3, or x and negative x. And the reason these are the inverses of each other is 5 plus negative 5, they cancel out and give 0. Negative 3 plus positive 3 cancels out and gives 0. X plus negative x cancels out and gives 0. For multiplicative inverse, now we're looking at the reciprocal. So now we're looking at 5 and 1 over 5. Or 3 halves and 2/3. Or x and 1 over x. Reason being here is 5 times 1/5 is 1. 3 halves times 2/3 is 1. X times 1 over x, they cancel, is 1. Right, we use those a lot when we're solving. So again, these two, they go together. These last three are less about computations and more about changing the way equations look. So the first one that we're talking about is the associative property. In other words, who do you associate yourself with, right? An associate means who do you kind of hang out with, or do you hang out around, right? If you think of an associate, a lot of times we think about a store associate. Think about the people who are always like following you around when you're trying to find shoes, or you go to the buckle and they're like, hey, can I help you? They're hanging around you. The associative property talks about changing the groupings of how people are hanging out, so to speak. And in terms of an example, it might look something like this. 6 plus 3 plus 7. Well, I can change who the 3 is hanging out with. I can make it 6 plus 3, and then now 7 is all alone. Here's where this is helpful. If I have 7 times 5x, I can think of that as changing the who is associated, and I can change that to 7 times 5x, right? So that's one way to deal with some of these coefficients. And also change the order of things with the commutative property. In other words, if I have 3 plus 7, that's the same as 7 plus 3. The result is still 10, no matter how I attack it with the order. And x times 5 is the same as 5 times x, or it might be helpful to think of it as 5x, right? But we can change the order of how we multiply things. The final property that you are probably the most familiar with out of all these, we saved the best for last, is the distributive property. You've been using the distributive property since you could solve equations, right? When the distributive property works by taking a number in front or a number in the back and multiplying with terms that are inside parentheses. So for example, 6x plus 30 or 5x plus 10y. So these are all of our properties that we have. We're going to do some practice with these, but hopefully this gives you kind of an idea of what's going on. So you got this. You can do this. Ready, go.